As a starting point for our research, we consulted Eckert's recently published autobiographical anthology of articles, Meaning and Linguistic Variation, the Third Wave in Sociolinguistics. Penelope Eckert was born in 1942 in New Jersey. In 1963, she obtained a BA in French from Oberlin College. Eckert then began pursuing a master's degree in linguistics at Columbia University, where she met an important mentor, William Labov, and became involved in the field of sociolinguistics. In 1968, she received a master's degree from Columbia for her study of the morphological constraints that affected the raising of unstressed A to O in Gascon, a dialect of a language called Occitan, spoken in southern France. Gascon was undergoing significant change due to its contact with and displacement by French, the official national language. From 1970 to 1972, she lived in southern France in a town called Soulon and continued her study of Gascon. While there, she observed that social pressure to recognize French as the high language was driven primarily by economic concerns. Because French was considered the more prestigious language, younger speakers felt compelled to learn and speak French to increase their economic opportunities. Eckert's experience living with bilingual Gascon and French speakers led her to a lifelong pursuit of studying the hows and whys of linguistic sound changes rather than just their phonological properties. For her analysis of both diachronic and synchronic phonological changes to Gascon, Columbia awarded her a PhD in linguistics in 1978. Eckert considers her Gascon studies the first of three primary phases or waves of her linguistic career. From 1972 to 1985, Eckert was a research scientist at the University of Michigan, where she spent most of the second wave of her career focusing her linguistic studies on local social dynamics. At Michigan, she became an ethnographer and performed an in-depth ethnographic research study of high school students in the Detroit area. Eckert presented her findings in a book that, according to Google Scholar, is her most cited work, Jocks and Burnouts, Social Identity in the High School. Her Jocks and Burnout study helped to establish ethnography's critical role in understanding how and why speakers use language to place themselves within a socioeconomic spectrum. Without analyzing the underlying social relationships of a speech community, sociolinguists cannot deeply understand the reasons that people vary their speech. Her Jocks and Burnout study also inspired the central preoccupation of her linguistic work, style.
Eckert identifies the results of Labov's 1966 study of social stratification of English in New York City as what characterized the first wave of variation. These characteristics include the stratification of linguistic form according to socioeconomic status distributions and the fact of higher occurrence of non-standard forms and greater regional and ethnic variation as socioeconomic status descends. It was also noted during this time that language is stigmatized according to standard form patterns and that the occurrence of stigmatized non-standard language forms increases as socioeconomic status descends. As a result, theory is generally based on the upper middle class as the origin of change because this class uses standard language forms the most frequently. The Labov pioneered studies of relationships between linguistic variables and demographic categories, such as class, age, and ethnicity, created a framework for studying the social spread of sound change. The second wave of variation, according to Eckert, complicates the foci of the first wave to an ethnographic context in which studies explore the relationship between variation and speaker design categories such as identity constructed within class or locality. Milroy's study of phonological variation in Belfast communities whose boundaries coincided with social networks showed the correlation between variation and the multiplexity of working-class women's social networks. This finding supported her assertion of the extent of norm enforcement in the working class, which was reflected in the distribution of certain vernacular variables among the social networks. Later studies added to Milroy's findings the relationship between local variant use and involvement with ethnically defined networks. The third wave of variation, with a slightly less distinct commencement than the previous two waves, combined concepts of category affiliation and stylistic practice and transitioned variation study from passivity on the part of speakers to active identity construction using stylistic practices associated with certain categories. Variation in language was studied as a useful performative system and means of socially establishing affiliation rather than as a product of social circumstances. Areas of interest regarding sociolinguistic study were expanded in this wave to include any linguistic material that can express social meaning, including styles of speaking rather than just dialects. This is indicative of a shift in focus toward examining language as a performative tool within a system of expressing social meaning. Eckert's characterization of language and gender takes gender as a social construct that can be expressed in language to indicate status, often within contexts of heterosexual activity, but also taking other intersecting contexts into consideration, such as ethnicity. At a junior high in Northern California, Eckert studied Asian Americans' identity construction within Asian American ethnicity and gender constructs. Significant variables she noticed were exaggerated question intonation, stress shift, and speed on the part of the girls. This was exemplified by one girl named Linda's questioning of a boy student as to what he was, her question referring to his specific Asian American identity, in which utterance she utilized an exaggerated high tone. In response, a girl named Adrienne answered, "He's Japanese Filipino," on the boy's behalf. The combination of the exaggerated high tone and answering on the boy's behalf was the girl's way of asserting female dominance over the boy in question using linguistic materials. This move also reinforced the Asian American girls' status as players within their community. In keeping with norms, this was accepted quietly by the boys. Eckert also noted in this study that speech style can intersect with other social cues, such as movement or dress, to communicate group membership, using the examples of Asian American girls' hair tossing and waistline accentuating clothing. Eckert's study utilized the concept of communities of practice to group the students of the Asian Wall. Communities of practice are groups determined by factors such as ethnicity and geographical location and require participants to learn norms and engage one another in order to fully integrate. Eckert theorizes that these groups can generate data which can give linguists a sense of gender construction and how it is established and supported within a community of practice. Data gathered from this sampling, she explains, can amass to allow linguists to make more generalizable suggestions about gender construction using language and style. Since 1994, Eckert has been a professor of linguistics and cultural and social anthropology at Stanford University. She currently serves as the president of the Linguistic Society of America, as her mentor William Labov did in 1979. Thank you for viewing our video.